I think that the photographer works at creating an image that has a harmonious quality, where the elements that you're photographing have that, sort of come into harmony. And of course, there is not some place where they are in harmony and anyone could photograph them because they are in harmony. Your participation in this process is one of the elements that has to be harmonized. Where you put the lens, where you are, how high you are, what your angle is, all of that. From a Buddhist point of view, things, phenomena, all is merely the, let's say, the dance of the elements which things are made of. And if you realize that the thing doesn't exist in and of itself, it is merely that interdependence, and you are a participant in that, that has a link with the spiritual. What I have to do is create the situation where there comes a certain calm, there comes a certain concentration where the person I'm photographing, who's standing in front of me, somehow reveals, gives something of himself. And I take the photograph with the person looking into the lens. My job, as it were, is to get all of those elements right. You know, technically it all has to be set up properly, and the atmosphere has to be such that there is this moment where, and that's it. I don't think of that as being something that might lead to some uplifting anything. No, I don't go that far. I just take the picture. Cartier-Bresson was, I think, from the very start, an enormous influence. I think he was on everyone. But I didn't feel so comfortable photographing walking around the world. I felt initially much more comfortable working within a controlled space. But as I stepped out, yes, he, and then Robert Frank was someone who, again, influenced everyone, and the whole looseness, the whole sort of slightly rough take he had, I think it gave us permission. It pushed us that little bit further from the very proper composition of Cartier-Bresson. It was like a little push to the extreme in what one permitted oneself to record and how one permitted oneself to record. I mean, having just been to see the Kudelka exhibition, gypsies pushed me, and I think pushed everyone that much further. The whole idea of immersing yourself in a particular environment among a particular group of people, of being the gypsy among the gypsies and photographing, that was very important, because I really think that in order to photograph in a meaningful way, you have to be photographing your world. When you work in large format, you don't take a lot of pictures, you take your picture. And eventually, I got an 8x10, and that's what I'm using in the monastery. And that really is, in terms of photographing my world, a very interesting way of photographing my world, because my fellow monks have to come to me. I photograph them against a particular white wall, and they have to share in this experience. They have to give of themselves. So I don't consider it Kudelka-like in terms of the style of photography, but it might be Kudelka-like in that I am photographing my fellow monks within the monastery. You know, there are people like Minor White who would meditate before he went out to photograph and would get his students to do that, and I wouldn't do that. There seems to be something slightly contrived about that from my point of view. I mean, for some people it would work. I think that in life, the calmer you are, the more steady you are, the better you're going to function. So I think that in that sense, that calm steadiness is important. I'm not a great believer in conscientiously tweaking the emotion with which you approach picture taking. I think picture taking should be lighter. I think that of course you have to do those things in your meditation That's sort of part of our daily practice. But then you go out and photograph. There was a monk, an elder monk at Rateux, who sort of cared for me while I was there when I first came, and he cooked. And eventually when the monk who was my teacher died, he assumed the sort of official role of being my teacher. And I went to visit him. There was a young monk who was reading, and he was memorizing, and he had his book propped up on a little book holder, and he was doing his memorization, and my teacher was watching over this process, and I was seated talking to my teacher over here, and suddenly I saw this absolutely beautiful composition of this young monk memorizing with the light coming, and I photographed, and all the elements were right there. They were just sort of presented to me like that. When Martine Franck, the widow of Cartier-Bresson, well, at the time, he was alive when she came to the monastery, and we spent a few days together, and she said to me, "You have such a love for photography, you must resume picture taking." She knew that I had stopped. And I said to her, "Well, you know, it's tough because it's like the piano. If you don't do your scales every day, you will not be able to produce music." And she said, "Do your scales." The sort of skillful element was that she said, "Don't bother to do more than your scales. Just take a few pictures every day. Maintain that practice of composing, of creating." You know, the word practice gives it a sort of importance that I'm a little afraid of. I take pictures every day. Take the photograph that's just of a monk and his rosary. It's just a simple, straightforward close-up, nothing extraordinary, just pared down. I think that when you remove the superfluous and just get down to the basics, that's when something may come alive in some other way. And I think this photograph has a sort of simplicity that is its strength. A photograph demonstrates impermanence in that you have that moment in time, and then time keeps on going. And if you relate back to that, you see how time has gone. I mean, it's interesting when you look at photographs from the 70s or 60s or 50s, and we don't notice the passage of time. We don't notice the changes in the aesthetics of what we experience. But when we look at a photograph, we say, "Oh my goodness, you know, things have evolved." You look at phone booths, and you say, "Oh, you know, that's something that doesn't exist anymore." So photography can also point out impermanence. Photography is neutral. It is not in and of itself a spiritual anything. Photography is, you know, the camera takes the picture, and when you click, what makes something like photography spiritual is the motivation with which you enter into it, engage in it. And if your motivation is truly selfless, and if you are doing it for the benefit of others in some way, then it is a spiritual practice. If you're doing it to express yourself, and if you're doing it out of some kind of sort of ego, whatever, then of course it's a negative thing. So it really depends on the purity, the quality of your motivation.